Hello and welcome to episode 14 at the House of Dissent podcast. Before I begin, I want to dedicate this episode to Francesca Albanese, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, and the Hind Rajab Foundation, named after a 5-year-old Palestinian girl. If you have time, please visit their website, which states on their homepage, and I quote, Hind Rajab was a 5-year-old Palestinian girl in Gaza. As her family sought to escape the relentless bombardment in Tel al-Hawa, their car was mercilessly targeted by an Israeli tank in an attack that can only be described as a war crime. Hind survived the initial barrage, only to be left alone in the blood-soaked car, surrounded by the bodies of her loved ones. Her desperate cries for help as she begged for rescue on the phone with emergency services moved hearts around the world. The ambulance that was sent to save her after hours of negotiation was obliterated by the Israeli army, ensuring that Hind's life was cruelly and deliberately extinguished. Now, in this episode, I will claim that we can apply Hannah Arendt's concept called the banality of evil to Israel's conduct towards the Palestinians, not from October 2023, but from 1948, when Jews, mostly without any connection to the so-called Holy Land, invaded and colonized Palestine, removed Palestinians from their homeland, occupied Palestinian homes, and claimed it theirs. The assault on Gaza post-October 7th is merely an extension of the land grab that began in 1948, except this time the Israelis have really speeded things up. Because the only way Netanyahu can remain in power and avoid imprisonment is to rely on the support of Zionist zealots such as Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. Smotrich is a self-proclaimed fascist homophobe and leader of the National Religious Party, Religious Zionism, a far-right party which adheres to Jewish supremacy. Gvir is a convicted criminal and a follower of Meir Kahane, an American rabbi who, according to Joshua Leifer, was a violent fanatic. In a piece written by Leifer for The Guardian titled Kahane's Ghost, How a Long-Dead Extremist Rabbi Continues to Haunt Israel's Politics, published in March 2025, he quotes Avraham Berg, a former Labour member of the Knesset, who said, Kahane believed in the ideology that you shall murder, and died at the hands of someone who also believed in that ideology. And here's another quote from that article. From the moment he arrived in Israel in 1971, Kahane preached a shocking mixture of violent ethno-nationalism and apocalyptic religious fundamentalism. He claimed that violence was a Jewish value and revenge a divine commandment. He agitated for the expulsion of Palestinians from all the territories under Israel's control. The party he founded, Kutch, was Israel's first to make the idea its central policy demand. He envisioned a state of Jewish totality in which all matters would be decided according to his idiosyncratic interpretation of Jewish law. During his brief tenure as a legislator, he called for banning marriage between Jews and Arabs and criminalizing sex between Jews and Gentiles. He proposed that insulting Judaism be made illegal and Sabbath observance be made compulsory. He demanded the ethno-religious segregation of the country's institutions, even its public beaches. And then Kiefer says this. Since 7 October 2023, Kahanism has become mainstream. It is the political style that relishes the dehumanization of Palestinians. It is the ethos according to which Jewish lives are seen as more valuable than all others. It is the ideology behind the normalization of population transfer and ethnic cleansing. Netanyahu's Likud has undergone a process of near total Kahanization, to say nothing of the settler right. Now, it's interesting to note that 100 years earlier, in 1923, the reactionary Vladimir Jabotinsky wrote the blueprint for the colonization of Palestine, called the Iron Wall. The revisionist Zionism he founded had direct links to fascism, particularly Italian fascism under Mussolini. Jabotinsky had written to Mussolini a year earlier in 1922, stating revisionist Zionism is to be compared with Italian fascism. Indeed, the youth movement Jabotinsky founded was called Betar, and they directly copied the Italian fascist paramilitary structures. This is how we should see Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich as advocates of the Iron Wall. Now, there is a certain perverted irony at play here. Prior to October 7th, most people outside of Israel, it's reasonable to argue, had little, if any, understanding of the issues and cruelties in detail that the Israelis have inflicted upon the Palestinian people since 1948. Now far more people, now have a better grasp, and if there is one positive thing we can take from this genocidal horror show, it is that a greater number of people are far more informed about the plight of the Palestinians post-1948. Most media corporations, however, still refuse to place the Hamas attacks of 2023 into its proper historical context of 1948 onwards, as if it were an isolated event. Such ahistorical news reports were documented by the Glasgow Media Group in their books Bad News from Israel, followed later by More Bad News from Israel. And you will find my account of the Glasgow Media Group in episode 7 of these podcasts. Now, this ignorance by large corporations is unforgivable and is alive and kicking today, as evidenced in a BBC interview the former England footballer and presenter Gary Lineker gave to Amal Rajan on April 22, 2025. For those listening who aren't familiar, Amal Rajan is a top-level news presenter for the BBC, mainly found on Radio 4's Today, which is a BBC flagship news programme starting at 6 a.m. So you would expect a high degree of knowledge on these important issues. But Gary Lineker exposed Rajan for his complete ignorance, not just of the Palestinian issue, but for his and the BBC's claims that it is impartial, and therefore gives a balanced account of the slaughter in Gaza. Lineker quite rightly told Rajan that the BBC isn't impartial over the Ukraine-Russian conflict, so why should it be impartial about the Palestinian issue? Lineker also reminded Rajan that the conflict precedes October 7, 2023, which dates to the Jewish invasion of Palestine in 1948. The Glasgow Media Group had gone further years before by providing empirical evidence that prior to 2006, the BBC news reports were favourable towards the Israelis and not so towards the Palestinians, leading the Glasgow Media Group to claims of BBC bias in media coverage, despite the BBC's claims to always be impartial. In April 2006, the BBC governors published their findings on the impartiality of BBC coverage, and the report found that one aspect of the Glasgow Media Group's research was substantiated. It supported the Glasgow Media Group's findings that there was, and I quote, an absence of historical background of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that there was little reporting of the difficulties faced by the Palestinians in their daily lives. But the BBC, if we are to believe Amal Rajan, have failed abysmally to address the historical context that precedes October 2023. The hypocrisy and double standards here are extreme. For instance, I cannot find any so-called impartial account of the Jewish Holocaust. Can you imagine asking the Nazis for their account to rationalize the slaughter of innocent people that also included Roma, communists, homosexuals, and more? The horror of the Holocaust is so obvious, nobody requires an attempt by the Nazis to give their side of the story. The horrors of the slaughter of innocents in Gaza, plus the land grab in the West Bank, plus administrative detention of Palestinians, plus daily humiliation of Palestinians having to pass through Israeli checkpoints, is equally so obvious in its barbaric cruelty that people also do not require the Israeli side of the story. Bet Salem, the Israeli Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, explains what administrative detention is, and I quote, "In administrative detention, a person is held without trial, without having committed an offence, on the grounds that he or she plans to break the law in the future. As this measure is supposed to be preventive, it has no time limit. The person is detained without legal proceedings by order of the regional military commander, based on classified evidence that is not revealed to them. This leaves the detainees helpless, facing unknown allegations with no way to disprove them, not knowing when they will be released, and without being charged, tried, or convicted." Hannah Arendt's idea of the banality of evil sought to document how evil actions are just so ordinary that people become indifferent to them. Just another day activity like shopping, drinking, or bathing on an Israeli beach as innocent people are murdered in an act of genocide. If you have watched the film called The Zone of Interest, directed by Jonathan Glazer, then you should easily understand what Arendt meant by the banality of evil. If you haven't seen it, the film documents the life of the Auschwitz commandant Rudolf Höss and his family who lived next door to the concentration camp. Indifferent to the horrors occurring next to them, the children play happily, and the wife of Höss, Hadwig, tends to her garden, whilst white ash from the furnaces occasionally blows over from the camp. In response to the zone of interest, the Australian-based academic Ghassan Haj published a paper in 2024 titled "Zone of Interest as an Ethnography of Indifference." And this is how he begins. "I saw Zone of Interest when it first appeared. Like many, I came out thinking that I have just seen one of the best movies I have been to in a long time. As I watched Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz concentration camp, his wife, Hedwig, and their children, live the life of their dreams in the house of their dreams, while only being separated from the exterminatory furnaces by a mere wall. It was hard not to keep thinking, this is all of us now in the shadow of the mass murders committed in Gaza, living in cultures that have banalized evil. But the thought came to me that maybe it was just me projecting my Middle Eastern sensitivities and obsessions into the film. When I came out of the theatre and started talking to others, it was clear that I was hardly the only one to think this." And he continues, "Later, the director's courageous Oscar acceptance speech, Naomi Klein's incisive reflection on the film's significance, and my colleague Marcello Swirsky's comments about the politics of the never again in which the film intervenes all reinforced the view of the film as offering what Foucault would call a history of the present, a view of the past that is also about our everyday lives in the now." Another academic, Lindsay Stonebridge, also wrote a piece in 2024 titled mythic Banality, Jonathan Glazer and Hannah Arendt, and here's how she begins. The Zone of Interest is a film that has been shot at least twice. Once through the lens of its director, Jonathan Glazer, and then again through the lens of the 7 October Hamas attack and the subsequent war on Gaza. Few Holocaust films have spoken to our times so directly. When Glazer made that connection implicit in his Oscars acceptance speech, not to say, look what they did then, rather, look what we do now, he too became part of the proxy cultural conflict that has raged from Berlin to New York. Throughout all of this, the ghost of Hannah Arendt has been a notable presence. And she continues. Before its general release, Glazer said that while working on the film, he was constantly thinking of Arendt's description of how it was not radical evil, but an outrageous mindlessness that powered the industrialized genocide of the Holocaust. Whether judged as achingly timely masterpiece or denounced as holokitsch, the film's critics have followed Glazer's lead and regularly evoked Arendt's banality of evil. The phrase she used in her controversial reports on the 1961 trial of the Nazi Adolf Eichmann. And she finishes this. In fact, whether people love or loathe the film often seems to turn on whether they approve or disapprove of Arendt's thesis, or indeed of Arendt herself, for just as her debunking of the myth of demonic Nazis earned her public opprobrium, so too has Glazer's Oscars speech turned him into a controversial figure in the very history he is asking us to understand. And finally, Itamar Mann wrote a piece titled Everyday Evil and the Family, Watching the Zone of Interest in Israel 2024. And here's what he says. Sitting in the theatre during this brutal war, I could not help but thinking that on some level the film serves as a stark reminder. Call the violence in Gaza what you will, it is different from the planned, systematic extermination of humans in gas chambers. Rudolph and his colleagues discussed the design of the crematoria, the engineering efforts put into them, complete with questions of energy and killing efficiency. Such problems of efficiency in systematic killing are far removed from the present, far more chaotic conditions of vengeful and indiscriminate destruction and plausible genocide in Gaza. And he finally says this. Yet, there are also continuities between the conditions depicted on the screen and the ones on the streets of Israel. Starting from an obvious point, we are sitting in a movie theatre, later discussing the film over beer. Not so far from here, Palestinian children are being starved. Now, Hannah Arendt produced her idea of the banality of evil after she had personally watched Adolf Eichmann testify at the Nuremberg trials directly after World War II. Arendt suddenly realized that evil had become ordinary under the Nazis, just a matter of fact, just the way things are. She was particularly struck by Eichmann himself, who for her was somebody you could meet in a cafe, and who would seem ordinary, human, even likeable. Hannah Arendt was born in 1906 into a secular Jewish household, and later she became influenced by the German Marxist Rosa Luxemburg. She had a long-time affair with Martin Heidegger, a fully paid-up member of the German Nazi Party, and make of that as you will. Arendt's main focus concerning the banality of evil was towards Nazism and Stalinism, although she never ruled it out that it could occur under so-called democratic systems. But overall, her argument was that totalitarian systems were able to create that social environment because they installed fear and terror into the population. Arendt was happy that her Jewish family had been assimilated into German society, considering the many pogroms Jews had undergone. But the Nazi experience had a profound effect on her, which led to her support of a Zionist solution for the Jews. She was influenced by the German Zionist Kurt Blumenfeld, who proposed a post-assimilation Zionist model, who argued for a Jewish homeland, based on national identity, not religion, in Palestine as a bi-national state. In other words, a one-state solution shared between Jews and Palestinians. It only took around 10 years to realize that the bi-national solution would never be successful. And so that has come to pass today, where the only solution on the wonky table is a two-state solution, and even that seems a long way away. But who would have thought that Jews, after what they had gone through, would inflict the most brutal form of evil when they claimed Israel as their homeland, and in the process forcibly and violently removing Palestinians from their homes? Many people are rightly mystified about the slaughter of innocent Palestinians in Gaza given the history of the Holocaust. How could a victim of such horrors of Nazi brutality and countless pogroms do the same thing to others? One important thing to bear in mind is that Zionists are critical of the passive way Jews dealt with the Nazis or other oppressors prior to them. And Zionists said, "No more, we will not stand by, we will fight." And who could blame them after years of oppression? But to persecute the Palestinian people is an act of a bully, and a bully, a thug, just like the Nazis. Today, the Zionists have successfully replicated their own history in opposite directions. Under the Nazis or the Spanish, for example, Jews were seen as subhuman, and here we are today, where Jews view Palestinians in the same way. In Israel, the banality of evil began in 1948 with the forced removal of Palestinians and the introduction of an educational system starting early in a child's life, which normal people call indoctrination. The indoctrination of Israelis takes many forms, but essentially at its heart is to view Palestinian Arabs, and Arabs per se, as subhuman. Over a period of time, let's say from 1948, this indoctrination embraces evil as a matter of fact, as just another day of hatred without blinking or flinching. This is Eichmann reincarnated. This is exactly what the film Zone of Interest was all about. In the introduction to Arendt's book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil, Amos Elon says this: in the origins of totalitarianism, she still held onto the Kantian notion of radical evil, the evil that under the Nazis corrupted the basis of moral law, exploded legal categories, and defied human judgment. In Eichmann in Jerusalem, and in the bitter controversies about it that followed, she insisted that only good had any depth. Good can be radical. Evil can never be radical. It can only be extreme, for it possesses neither depth nor any demonic dimension, yet, and this is its horror, it can spread like a fungus over the surface of the earth and lay waste the entire world. Evil comes from a failure to think. It defies thought, for as soon as thought tries to engage itself with evil and examine the premises and principles from which it originates, it is frustrated because it finds nothing there. That is the banality of evil. Now, in a piece written by Rabbi Ethem Bear, written in 2016, titled On Arendt, Creating a Zionism That Owns Its Own Mistakes, he says this: Hannah Arendt would find it tricky to be a Zionist today. She was critical of David Ben-Gurion's policy of effectively ignoring the Palestinians' sincere pursuit of national sovereignty. She advocated a Zionism that would be achieved through excellent relation with the Palestinian neighbours, rather in spite of them. In her essay, To Save the Jewish Homeland, her main argument is more of a warning. That a people so intensely traumatized by the Holocaust are in a psychologically precarious position to begin a new state. She also points out that American and European Jewish support for Zionism had been quite tenuous until the immediate post-war period, when suddenly everyone seemed to think that it was now or never for Zionism. And the good rabbi provides a quote from Hannah Arendt, which says, "Even more surprising than the growing unanimity of opinion among Palestinian Jews on one hand and American Jews on the other is the fact that they are essentially in agreement on the following more or less roughly stated propositions. The moment has now come to get everything or nothing, victory or death. Arab and Jewish claims are irreconcilable, and only a military decision can settle the issue. The Arabs, all Arabs, are our enemies, and we accept this fact. Only outmoded liberals believe in compromises. Only Philistines believe in justice. And only Shlemiels prefer truth and negotiation to propaganda and machine guns." By the way, Shlemiels is Yiddish for a fool or incompetent person. In modern times, there is no equivalent to what is occurring in Israel today, as evil transcends virtually every nook and cranny of that country. I spent my younger years in the anti-apartheid movement and watched the brutalities of the white apartheid regime on the black South African community. I campaigned alongside and was a good friend to Hanif Bamji, who was a leading anti-apartheid campaigner based in Cardiff, Wales. I was living at the time in my birthtown Newport, a few miles from Hanif. Hanif escaped detention from the South African Security Service for being a Marxist of Indian descent, and nothing I saw in South Africa ever compares with what the Israelis are doing today against the Palestinians. It truly is in a barbaric league of its own. So how is the Israeli media contributing towards normalizing evil, making it so banal it's just another part of life? Today, the extremist right-wing Channel 14, which openly calls for the removal of Palestinians from both Gaza and the West Bank, is one of the most popular channels in Israel. One particular program worth of note is The Patriots, which endorses Netanyahu's anti-media propaganda and which is scathing of other channels. Channel 14 promotes extreme right-wing nationalist sentiment, and Netanyahu's support for it is based on his conviction to marginalize critical forms of journalism in Israel. It's a classic example of the banality of evil because it seeks to normalize extremist views, excludes Palestinian voices, and regularly takes aim of international perspectives on the war, such as the United Nations. And now that France is to recognize a Palestinian state, they too will be targets for the virulent and vile noise which comes from Channel 14. When Quentin Tarantino directed Reservoir Dogs, released in 1992, he based the film on the banality of evil, and people were shocked by seeing it, by watching it, and wondered why is there so much violence. But violence was just another day at the office. Nobody blinks an eye. This is how life is. In 2025, 128 years after the founding of the World Zionist Organization, the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress was formed in Vienna. One attendee was Holocaust survivor Stephen Kapos, who said that the assault on the Gazans is more evil and complete than it was on the Jews during the Holocaust. And you can find his comments on YouTube. In the next episode, I'll be discussing the absurdity of prescribing Palestine action as a terrorist organization. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.